Welcome to the Explore Words, Discover World podcast, presented by Bradford Literature Festival. In this episode, we delve into life and work of one of the most successful crime writers in the world, Val McDermid. She's joined by host Abir Mukherjee to discuss her 35-year career and selling a staggering 18.5 million books around the world. Recorded live at the 2023 Bradford Literature Festival, this episode explores the extraordinary life and work of the Scottish-born writer.
Introducing you. Wow, look at this place. Look at you people. I feel like I need a gavel. Guilty or very guilty? That's what I'm trying to decide with this crowd in here. Just a hammer, yes. I have to say, well, good afternoon and welcome to the Bradford Literature Festival. I'm Abir Mukherjee, author of the Wyndham and Banerjee novels. But today we are here to celebrate one of the most illustrious crime writers, not just in Britain, but in the world. The queen of crime fiction. The one, the only, Val McDermid. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Val, is this the first time you have been in a courtroom? No, in Bradford?
No.
Ah.
No, I was in Bradford many times when I was a journalist in Manchester, but also I was at, I think, the first Bradford Literature Festival some years ago. They tried it out, and I was there for that.
Right. Okay. So they tried it. They didn't try it on. They tried it out.
Tried it out.
Right.
Yes.
Good to know. But let's get to the beginning. Let's tell the audience some of the facts about Val McDermid. You have sold almost 20 million copies of books.
And not all to members of my family.
I was going to say, you're not Asian, right? So I can't say that in Bradford. I get into trouble, won't I? Yeah, sorry. I'm Asian. I can say it. It's allowed. We have big families and we're proud of it. Your work has been translated into over 40 languages. Mm-hmm. What's your favourite language that's been translated into?
In terms of how it looks, the Japanese ones are very beautiful. They've got lovely covers and they've got the lovely lettering and nice quality paper. I've no idea what the content is like. I look at them and I don't even know which book they are. But
they're
nice.
Beautiful to look at.
They're beautiful to look at.
You have published 39 fiction novels.
Yeah, this year's novel will be 39.
39.
Yeah.
See, I've done my homework.
Done your homework, yeah.
I used to be an
Count them all
accountant.
up on your fingers. Yeah.
You're known for what? Wire in the Blood, the Tony Hill and Carol Jordan series. You also have the Kate Brannigan series, the journalist Lindsay Gordon series, and obviously Karen Pirie. And most recently, the series that we're going to be talking about tonight mainly is the journalist Ali Burns series. We'll be talking about your new book, 1989, but also the series in general. But you're not just a writer, are you? You are a pop star. And we'll be talking about
that might be going just a wee bit too far.
Well, I don't know. You have played Glastonbury.
Yes, that's true.
So, I mean, you played it before Rick Astley, is that right? Yeah?
Yep.
He's going to give up now. He has to, right? I'm sorry. They don't get any better, ladies and gentlemen. But you're a playwright, you've written screenplays, and you've written a children's picture book, My Granny is a Pirate. Now, how many of you Val McDermid fans have My Granny is a Pirate? That's the die-hard fan right there, sitting right in the middle. She's got everything. You'll have to dedicate a book. Right, let's talk about your career as well. Tonight I want to talk about 1989. I want to talk about Ali Burns, but I want to talk about your career because to somebody like me, you're an inspiration. And tell us how it started, because you come from a small town in the less popular parts, the east of Scotland, not the cool half where I'm from, the west of Scotland. Tell us about your upbringing and how
It doesn't rain as much in our
It's
half.
true, it rains a lot in our part of the country.
It does.
I say that, I live in Surrey now. I've got Glaswegian self-loathing. But tell us how it all started.
Well, I grew up in a working class family in Kirkcaldy in Fife. My granddads were both miners. My dad worked in the shipyard, then worked for the town council. But my parents were both very bright, but were of a generation where they couldn't afford to go to the high school because their parents couldn't pay for the uniforms. So they never actually realised their full potential. And they were absolutely determined that the doors that had been closed to them should be opened for me. So I was encouraged very much that education was the answer to give me a better life chances. And my mum thought the way to do this was through reading. And when I was wee, she would put me in the pushchair and wheel me across the council estate to the library and read me picture books like My Granny is a Pirate. And then when I was 6, we moved house to live opposite the Central Library. And that became my home from home. I was there pretty much every night after school. I'd change my library books. I could easily read 2 novels in a night. And of course, back in those days, you could get 4 library books out at once. But because this was Presbyterian Scotland, 2 of them had to be non-fiction. Heaven forfend, you should have unmitigated pleasure.
Or any pleasure.
Yeah. So I ended up also reading a lot of non-fiction books I probably wouldn't otherwise have read, sort of history. Poetry and drama, for some reason, are classified as non-fiction, which isn't very kind to the dramatists and the poets, But I read all sorts of things, really. Particularly, I read the Chalet School books, which is a series of 50-odd girls' school stories set in Switzerland and Austria. And the thing I loved about those books was that they were actually a genuine series. It doesn't matter what order you read the famous 5 books in. It's still the same sempiternal summer, and they say the same stupid things. Nobody ever says, we'd better not go into the dark cave by ourselves, because the last time we went into the dark cave, something really bad happened. It's like
Timmy lost an arm.
Yeah, it's like they've got perpetual amnesia. But the Chalet School wasn't like that. Each book covered a term or a year in the life of the school. So events had consequences. If you broke your leg tobogganing in one book, you were still limping 3 books later, And that was my first real, although I wouldn't have recognised it as such at the time, was my first introduction to proper series fiction, where characters carry the weight of their past with them. And also, it was like doing a 3D jigsaw, because being library books, you could never read them in order. So you'd read book 27, and then it would be book 6, and then it would be book 43, and suddenly you'd go, that's why she's always like that.
That's where the eye patch came from.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing that was really life-changing for me was that one of the characters grows up to become a writer. And in one book, she gets a letter from her publisher. And so I'm reading away, it's on the right-hand page, about halfway down, there was a cheque in the envelope. And it was like an epiphany. I thought, they get paid for this. People get paid for just making stuff up. I could do that. I can tell lies.
Oh, yeah. So was that or politics, was it?
No, I decided that I was going to be a writer, and that was
so
that.
How old were you when you read this?
9.
9? And at that point, that set you on your journey?
Yes, it set me on my journey of being laughed at by everybody in my family and everybody in my class at school and everybody in my group at university.
Well, let's talk about that then. So how did your family react, and how did these people react, and what drove you to keep going?
They just laughed at me because people like us don't be writers, nobody in my family had ever done anything remotely artistic. Mine was the first generation where people went to university, but my cousins all did sort of sciencey things or medical things, and they just were outraged that I could get away with just making stuff up.
Oh, well, it's very
reading books.
It's very anti-Presbyterian, that, isn't it? When you grow up in the sort of fire and brimstone atmosphere of Scotland, you need fire and brimstone because it's so bloody cold all the time, right?
Yeah.
But you went through that, and despite, because we have, what we call tall poppy syndrome in Scotland. Anybody who sort of sticks their head above a certain level or does something differently, gets it metaphorically chopped off, and sometimes physically in Glasgow. But what drove you to keep going? What made you buck those trends? At what point did you realise that I can be so much more than the path that people expect me to follow?
Well, I think it comes down to to my dad, really. My dad was a great Burns man. Not setting fire to things, but Robert Burns, the poet. He was the lead tenor of the Bow Hill People's Burns Club concert party. And so his life was very much revolved around getting ready for Burns night. So, and then there would be the sort of 2-month period where he was out every night singing at a Burns supper. And he was a great believer in the politics of Burns. A man's a man for all that. And I was brought up to believe that I was as good as anybody else, and that the only thing that stood between me and what I wanted to do and my ambitions was me. So it was just, if I didn't achieve something I set out to do, he said, well, you'll just have to try harder next time. And it was that sort of sense of, as I say, being as good as anybody else. So why should I not be a writer? That I just was, and we've got a couple of words in Fife that I've always clung to. There's a word gallus, which means sort of a bit, flashy and a bit, a bit of
Bravado.
A bit of bravado, yeah. And another word, thrawn. And the nearest I think you can come to defining thrawn is bloody-minded and determined. And that's what I was.
So what's
the more
the
people
split?
said I couldn't do it, the more determined I was.
What's the split? How much are you use gallus and how much are you use thrawn?
There's more of me that's thrawn than gallus, I think. So I would like to be more gallus than thrawn.
Well, let's move it on a few years, because you were the first, as you say, in your family to go to university. And with you, you can't just go to any university. You had to go to Oxford. So what was that like, going from Fife, a wee mining town in Fife, to down to that there England, and to Oxford? What was that like?
It was, I think you'd have to say it was a culture shock. I mean, there's no two ways about it. What you hear now is what my partner calls my Radio 4 Scottish accent. But I grew up in Fife, Ken, where we talk like this, the spugs fly back was to keep the stew out the rain, Ken? And that's who I spoke when I went down to Oxford, Ken. And
they're all looking at me going, who's Ken? Who's this Ken she's talking to?
And nobody came what I was saying, Ken.
Yeah. So we've got subtitles for the hard of Scottish here.
And my first tutorial, I had to read out an essay, and I started reading my essay, which was about Gerard Manley Hopkins' Wreck of the Deutschland. And I was about 3 paragraphs in, and my tutor stopped me and said, I'm most terribly sorry, Miss McDermid, I haven't understood a word you've said. Might you begin again, and perhaps more slowly this time? Oh. See, after that, she used to ask me to hand my essays in. But it wasn't just that. I mean, I realised I had to learn to speak English in order to be understood. English. Well, sort of English. Yeah. Posh Scottish English.
Posh, yes.
I also, I mean, it was, everything was different. The vegetables were different.
Well, there were vegetables.
There were vegetables, yeah. There were more than 3 vegetables, yeah. I mean, and I went out to an Italian restaurant in my first term, and we were all ordering things. And I looked at this menu, I didn't recognise anything on it except pizza. I saw pizza. I thought, I know what a pizza is, I'll order a pizza. So I ordered a pizza, and this round thing arrived with tomato sauce and all sorts of things on it. And I said, excuse me, that's not a pizza. And he said, of course it's a pizza. This is what pizza is. I said, no, pizza's half moon-shaped and covered in batter.
It's not deep fried.
So I had quite a lot of difficulties to overcome, but on the other hand, I was determined that I was as good as anybody else there, that I didn't have a chip on my shoulder. Yeah. I genuinely thought I was there because I deserved to be. And it was up to them to sort themselves out and give me the keys to the kingdom.
I think that is fascinating, because, we talk as writers of having imposter syndrome, and for me anyway, it doesn't apply just to writing. It applies to so much of my life, of almost feeling like I am being allowed access to places. Maybe it's because of the fact that I'm the child of immigrants. I always feel like I need to ask permission to be places. But you never felt that. You always felt the door is open. It deserves to be open.
I sometimes felt like the door deserves to be kicked open. Yeah. I was not... I always felt like an outsider. And I still feel like an outsider so much of the time. I mean, it's ridiculous, really. I mean, as one of my friends pointed out to me this week, you're firmly at the heart of the establishment, but I never feel like I am. I feel like I'm the one standing on the edge of the
You're still
crowd.
Kicking at the establishment.
I'm still kicking at them, yeah. And quite right, somebody has to.
Well, yes. Well, I want to talk about this. I mean, I want to get to the books, but I want to talk about this idea of being an outsider, because a lot of writers, a lot of my favourite writers, a lot of the best writers, I think, feel like outsiders their entire life. What do you think that gives to a writer? What this perspective of being outside but inside?
It gives you detachment, I think. You can write about things without that sense of obligation to whoever or whatever you're writing about, I think much more readily. And it gives you the ability to write about people from the perspective of people who are not part of the mainstream. And I think that's also important for a writer. You have to be able to see beyond the obvious.
Or point out the obvious that others don't.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's... the most important bit, I think, is that sense of not being obligated. You know, it's like that thing of I have strenuously refused to accept an honour. I mean, partly because it says British Empire.
Yeah. The amount of times Boris was on the... Yeah.
But more importantly to me, it's if you take their baubles, you can't kick them in the balls. Yeah. It's not polite.
Yeah. But it's polite.
I was well brought up, you know.
Yeah, yes. I will not take your baubles, I will just kick you in the balls.
Yes,
I think that should be the... that's a Bradford motto there and there, isn't it? I like that. I want to talk more about honours, but not now. Let's talk about this new series. Let's talk about the Ali Burns series. I say new. This is the second book. The first one was out last year. It's called 1979, and it follows a young journalist called Ali Burns from Scotland. And it's quite autobiographical. There's elements of it. There's elements of you that I see in it. Before we talk about the new book, tell us a bit about Ali and your inspiration for writing this series.
Well, Ali is a young journalist in Glasgow in 1979, and she's determined to become an investigative journalist. That's what she really wants to be. And she's also determined to be taken seriously in a man's world, being a young woman in that world where women were largely disregarded. And I know this because I was a young women reporter in Glasgow in 1979. But Ali is not me. She's very emphatically not me. For a start, I had a lot more fun in 1979 than she gets to have. You know? I was young, free and single, and I had money in my pocket.
So if any of you remember this, you can ask questions later. You can ask her what fun she had in 1979.
So, yeah, but that's really the starting point for it. And the reason why I started writing this sequence of novels was COVID. Got to March 2020, and I'd just finished writing Still Life, the sixth Karen Pirie novel. And I didn't know what to do, because up till that point, all my novels had been set against the here and now, and the world around me. And I couldn't write a novel in the here and now because it was changing every day. Yeah. You know, every day Nicola would get up and give her piece about where we're up to today and what we're going to do tomorrow that's different, or what happened today that's terrible. And I had no sense of what this was going to be. Was this going to be the one that sees us off? How many people are going to die? How are we going to live like this? What's going to happen next? It was a place I felt I was standing on shifting sands like all of us were. It was frightening. And I found it particularly frightening because in 2017 I'd written a series of radio plays called Resistance, which are about a virus. It's actually a bacterial disease that basically sees off humankind. And so I'd spoken to a lot of scientists about this sort of disease and the vectors of disease. So I was particularly terrified, I think, because I understood what something like this could do about, you know, the variations and different variants that suddenly change what the doctors are trying to do. So I was spending most of my days in a state of extreme anxiety, I think I'd have to say, and as many of us were. And so I thought, I have to write, because if I don't write, I'll just, you know, completely mad.
And did it take you time to get into the way of writing again? Was there a period when you couldn't write?
Not really, no. I mean, the thing that as soon as I realised what I had to do, that I had to find somewhere to stand on solid ground, and that meant going into the past where I knew what had happened, and I knew I could set my feet down and think, this is today, this is what was happening then, and trying to write that again without hindsight, trying to write it as if I was in the time. And the other thing, I suppose, was my publisher keeps on at me about writing a memoir. Now, I don't particularly want to write a memoir. I mean, there's lots of reasons why not. I mean,
well, you've got loads to go yet, right?
Exactly, I'm not finished.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, partly it's that thing of I didn't really want to spend 2 years sitting staring at my own navel, because I've got other stories to tell that are more interesting to me than my own. I mean, I think I'm quite boring, really. But
She doesn't know everything, right?
But I said that also the other thing is a lot of people would have to die before I could tell the truth and not end up in the libel courts. So, I decided the memoir was probably not a good way to go. But I wanted to. I found a way really to use what I'd learned in the world of writing, of different kinds of writing over the years, to translate that into a quintet of novels. And I wanted to finish it in the last year of normal life, 2019. And so I went back in 10-year chunks, and that took me to 1979, which really made me rub my hands with glee, because 1979 was a good year to write about.
Well, you had a lot of fun, apparently.
I did have a lot of fun, but Ali's not getting to have fun.
Although she does in 1989.
She does have more fun in 1989, yes.
I was just thinking, though, right, so idea for a novel, ladies and gentlemen. Writer wants to write their memoirs, but has to murder a lot of people before she can do it.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah. Do you want it, or will I do it?
I think we can do it together. I'll do the donkey work. You come up with the inspiration. How about that?
Okay, well, just put my name on it then.
That's fine.
Because that's what happens.
That's what happens
days.
these days, ladies and gentlemen. Lots of celebrities. Just while we're on that, we were in a panel. I don't know if any of you have heard Stephanie Merritt. She was here yesterday, and she was here today. She was saying, I asked her, what would you do if you were Minister of Culture? And she said, I would make celebrities, A, write their first book under a pen name, and B, not allow any ghostwriting. And then if they survived, if the name was leaked, then I'd have them executed. Which I think is very fair.
I think that's very fair.
What would you do as Minister of Culture? What would be your...
I'd actually support culture, support the arts, make it possible for theatre companies to put on theatre productions and dance companies to put on amazing dance productions. I saw recently the Barry Romberg did a thing about Peaky Blinders, was the redemption of Tommy Shelby. It was gobsmacking. I don't speak dance. And I was completely blown away by this. That's the kind of thing we should be doing all the time. Everyone should be able to go and see things like that. It shouldn't be priced out of people's pockets. I mean...
Well, I would agree with that, but I still think that the first policy should be to exile Nadine Dorries to the Isle of Wight.
That's a bit harsh on
without
the Isle of Wight.
internet, without any internet. Rockall, okay. That's harsh on seagulls, isn't it? Anyway. Let's talk about 1989, because this is the follow-up to 1979, and to me it was a very joyous book. There's a lot happening. I shouldn't say it's joyous. There's a lot of hard grit there, and I'll talk about that. But you seem to be having a lot of fun writing this book. Did you?
Well, yeah, I guess I did and I didn't. I mean, there was. I enjoyed following Ali's life. I enjoyed following how Ali has developed and how she's grown and how she's actually learned to deal with disappointments as well as success. But there were elements of this book that I found very hard to return to.
Let's talk about that, because this book opens with Ali at the funeral of the ceremony marking the Lockerbie disaster. And from there we go quickly into the AIDS pandemic, and later on we go to Hillsborough. And you were at a few of those events. You were reporting on it. Firstly, can you tell us what that was like for you at the time?
Pretty much hellish.
How old were you when you, or just what, were you in your 20s?
How old was I? I was in my early 30s.
Right. Still very young to be thrown into these sorts of environments.
I spent a lot of time that year in the living rooms of people who were grieving, who had lost somebody they loved. It was a hard year. And I was at Hillsborough on the afternoon it happened. I was there within half an hour of it, well, within 40 minutes of it starting. And I was in Lockerbie again the night it happened, because they were on my patch and I was the Northern Bureau Chief, so I had to be there. And it was traumatic. It was traumatic, walking into that gymnasium where we really shouldn't have been, and seeing the body bags. And it was that was the year that I decided I needed to get to journalism. I have nothing but admiration for the people who could continue to do that. I mean, I've got friends like Alan Little and Lise Doucette who'd go around the world covering terrible things, wars and disasters, And they seem to be able to find a way to deal with that and not become basket cases. But I didn't think I could do it. I think, to me, it seemed like you had to do one of two things. You either took it into yourself and allowed yourself to completely empathise with these people's losses and their pain and their grief and their anger. And that did you damage in one way. It just drained you. Or you could build a wall and hide behind that wall and not let it into you at all. And that damages you in different ways. Yeah. And I looked around at a lot of the people that I worked with, and I thought, I don't want to be you when I'm 50. And so I thought, I need to be not doing this anymore. My bad or my weakness, but it wasn't for me. I couldn't. I knew I couldn't survive it.
You say weakness, but it's not weakness. I mean, these are traumatic events. You're a young woman without any counselling at that sort of time, and you're in a world which is, if the books are to believe, the Ali is in a world dominated by men who A, don't even want her there, and B, have this extremely macho culture. What are you supposed to do in that environment? I mean, how did you cope with that environment?
I did my job better than the men, was the way to do it. Seriously, it was the only way to do it.
Yeah. The usual way for the women.
Yeah, I mean, it was the only, and I had the very good luck, or not, of having a very good capacity for drink. So I could match the guys drink for drink. In fact, some of them I could drink under the table, which earned me respect, which is ridiculous and appalling that you earn respect not by the brilliance of your reporting or the quality of your writing, but how much whiskey you can get through in an evening and still be standing. Yeah. But that's very much how it was.
You say how it was. You accused me of drinking girls' whiskey once.
Yeah, I did, yes.
Because I prefer sherried whiskey rather than smoky whiskey. Yes. So apparently I drink girls'
ladies' whiskey.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
or breakfast whiskey, as we sometimes call it.
The misogyny, ladies and gentlemen. What can I say? Yeah.
No, I don't drink like that anymore, though. I mean, if I drank like that now, I probably would be dead, as it were.
Let's move on slightly. Let's talk about the AIDS epidemic, because that plays a big part in this novel. And for me, it's one of the most powerful parts of this novel. Ali is reporting on the wave of AIDS victims in Edinburgh, because Edinburgh was the AIDS capital of Britain. Europe. And a lot of these people weren't getting any care at all and were leaving Edinburgh because of it. And you lived through those times. You were close to it. What was it like at that time? I mean, we remember it, but we probably weren't as close to Edinburgh as you were.
No, I mean, I was working out of Manchester at the time, but I was aware of what was happening in other places, because people would rock up in Manchester from Edinburgh talking about how dire it was there. But I mean, Manchester in many respects was not much better. It was just that nobody knew them there. I mean, we had a chief constable in Manchester. Some of you may remember, who once described people with AIDS as swilling around in a cesspit of their own making. And that was the kind of attitude that you got from a lot of public bodies, public figures. They opened a hospital in Edinburgh dedicated to infectious diseases with something like 45 beds, 4 of them for AIDS patients. It was that kind of thing. For me, it was doubly difficult because I was working for a tabloid newspaper, and I was also chair of the NUJ's Equality Council. So we would sit there and we'd formulate policy on how you write about this disease, and we'd distribute that to journalists, and they would just ignore it and carry on writing the same
how did you deal
homophobic, shouting at people a lot mostly. But I mean, it's one of those things. You speak up about it, and you try and change people's minds, and you try and change their minds story by story, and it doesn't always work. But I mean, some of us were willing to stand up to our news desks and have the argument. And I think sometimes we changed people's minds and sometimes we didn't. But you have to have the argument, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, that's how change starts, isn't it? By shouting.
Yeah, by shouting. Or by getting Princess Diana along to give them a hug.
There's a character in this novel who plays a large part, and I don't think I'm giving away any confidences to say that he may be modelled on a certain individual. There's a character called Ace Lockhart, who I think has a daughter called Genevieve, and it might be modelled on a certain Robert Maxwell.
Well, yeah, I did use my experience of working with Robert Maxwell in creating this character. I was mother of the chapel at Shropshire when Maxwell took over at Mirror Group. So I had a lot of direct negotiations with him about redundancies and about working conditions and all that kind of thing. And the man was horrible. He was a bully. He was deeply, deeply unpleasant, but he could also be charming. When he chose to be charming, he could be, genial and very, very good with people. But if he wasn't in the mood for being very good with people, he was horrible. He was hostile.
Is he a sociopath? Is that not the definition of a sociopath?
I don't know, sociopath, psychopath, one or the other. I remember one meeting we were having, and he was. It was probably about 6 months after he'd taken over, and he'd promised when he took over that he was going to restore the level of regional editions that we were doing out of Manchester. We used to do 9, and then it was cut back to 5, and he said he was going to put it back to 9. So we're in this meeting, and we're going through all the things that he'd promised to do, and I said I would do this, and I've done this, and you should be grateful for what I've done for you. And I said, could I just ask when you're intending to restore the level of editions like you promised? And he got up out of his seat, and he was a big man. I mean, he was tall as well as fat. And he came round, and he came that close to me and said, "Are you calling me a liar?" I mean...
How do you react to that?
I just said no.
Well, okay.
Because I knew what would happen if I said yes.
Yeah.
He would sack me.
Yeah.
He'd done it to other union officials. He'd done it to other people in the workplace. And frankly, I needed to pay the bills.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, okay, I'll just say yes. It's the coward's way out. I mean, I'll just say no rather. It's the coward's way out, but I'll keep my job.
Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor.
It was a bit scary to say. I mean, it was not my finest hour, but he unnerved people. He was not a presence you wanted in the office.
Well, it was he comes across as this bully that just sort of bulldozed his way to whatever he wanted. And I think we should talk about some of the happier things in this book. I'm going to pick up on some of the things that took me back, because it's the little touches. The little touches. There's a point where you mention, they tore their ring pools almost simultaneously off their cans. Now, and I hadn't thought about ring pools in 30 years.
Yeah.
What made you remember ring pools, huh? What is it?
I'm like summoning this up in my mind's eye and thinking, well, you'd sit down and you'd have to pull the ring pulls, and you'd make necklaces almost. You'd fix them, you'd fiddle them together, so you got chains of ring pulls, which was sometimes quite disturbing the morning after.
And tell us, yes, how much did I drink? It's like, tell us about the research you did for this. Did you have to go back and look at the detail, or was it all? Do you remember that night when we did this? And...
Well, there was that element of it, but there was also, sort of things like going online to check when ring pools became, snap pools and all that. So I find that there's several ways of doing this. Music is like a time machine. How often are you in the shop or something comes on the radio in the car and you think, oh yeah, I remember that song, I remember I was in such and such a bar, or I remember I was kissing so-and-so, or I was going out with somebody.
This is 1979 again, yeah?
Aye, absolutely. But, we all find that a particular song, a particular tune just snaps us back to where we were when that was a hit or when we first heard it. So that's one of the ways that I find quite handy to get back into the mood of the time. But local papers are really good as well, because they have not just got the stories in them. We all remember the big historic events of the time, but what we don't remember are the wee stories that we're sitting in the pub talking about, or discussing over dinner, or standing at the bus stop saying, did you see that thing on the news last night? Those are the things that we don't really remember, but they find their way into the papers, and they're often quite a handy hook to hang things on. But they're also very, very good for what was in the CNA sale. You look at me and think, did I really wear that blouse? And how much things cost, how much it was for a block of cheddar cheese, how much it was for a can of lager, how much it was for a 3-piece suite. I mean, I swear to God, I found my £99 suite in an advert. when I was looking through one of the newspapers, and it was. I thought, did I really sit on that sofa? I don't think so. Why I still sat on the floor, you know. But all that stuff is it's the texture of the times. It reminds you of what it was like, what it felt like. And then you look at what was on the telly, you know, when there was only 2 channels.
Radio Times, yeah. I'm going to ask you about music, because at the back of this book and at the back of 1979, you have a playlist. You have Ali Burns' playlist.
Yes, and it's Ali Burns' playlist, not my playlist.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, why is it Ali Burns and not yours? And how do you decide what she likes and what you, as opposed to what you like?
Look, she's different from me. She's not me.
No, but how do you decide that's what she would like?
Because you go through the great lists on Spotify and on Wikipedia for what was a hit at the time. You think Ali would like that. I wasn't so keen. Plus, her and Rona were big into going out dancing and clubbing more than I was. I mean, I did Hacienda from time to time, but they're avid out on the town girls on a Saturday night. So there's things in there that I wouldn't particularly have danced to or known particularly well.
So I'm not going to ask you about your top 40, but give us 5 tracks from that era that you would like.
I can't remember what's in that. Well, there would be Blondie would be in there, definitely. Blondie would be in there, probably Alison Moyet, probably the Eurythmics.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of Eurythmics in this, doesn't she?
Yes, she's big into Eurythmics. Yeah. Deacon Blue.
Yes, I was very upset as a Hue and Cry fan. There was no Hue and Cry in that list.
Take it up with Ali.
Well, I'll do it.
Take it up with
It's
the
a
lassie.
fair point. It's a fair point. Now, I'm going to ask you, are you psychic?
No.
Are you sure?
I'm positive.
When did you write this book?
When did I write this book?
Yeah.
Well, it came out last year.
Yeah, so it's over a year old.
I wrote it in the first 3 months of last year.
Because there's a section in this book where you talk about a gentleman called Timmy Tarleton, who is gay. He's a TV guy who's gay and having a relationship with a boyfriend who's more than a couple dozen years younger. Who is a runner, yes, a runner on the show.
What can I say?
Life imitates.
It's quite eerie when life imitates art. It happens more than I think.
Do you know what? In about 50 years' time or 100 years' time, people are going to be perusing the works of Val McDermid like Nostradamus, looking for these trains going, Val said it first.
Yeah.
Looking for meaning.
I have no inside information on that one.
Okay. Well,
it was the kind of story that my news editor would have drooled over when I was still working in newspapers.
well, yeah. Did you ever come across stories like that and break them? Not salacious gossip, but were there big stories that you broke?
There were 1 or 2. Yeah.
What story are you most proud of that you did?
That's always a tough question. I did a series back in the mid-'80s about women in prison, and there was some clickbait stuff in there, but there was also some very serious stuff about the number of women who were in prison with mental health problems, the number of women who were in prison for crimes for which men got non-custodial sentences, and so that was I thought that was an important story to do. But because it was a tabloid, we had to have it teased in with other things as well. But I was proud of doing that work. Some other stuff that the frustration sometimes of working on an investigation for months that didn't see the light of day because the lawyers bottled it. I remember one story that I worked on for about 6 months with a team of 10 female freelancers about a pregnancy advisory clinic that were sending quite a high percentage of the people who walked through their doors for abortions, and they were sending them to a clinic that was owned by the husband of the woman who owned the pregnancy advisory clinic. And it was quite clear to us in the course of our investigations that women were being sent for abortions who weren't actually pregnant. So they'd just be put under the anaesthesia, given a quick D&C, and off they'd go. And we worked on that for 6 months. Some of the women I was working with got as far as being in the gowns, about to go down for surgery before they actually said, I'm not going through with this, I'm not doing it. And at the end, the lawyers said, we can't run this because we'll be taking on, there's doctors involved in this, we'll be taking on the doctors, lawyers, we're tied up in court with this for the next 10 years, we're not doing it. So that was one that was really hard not to write. I mean, it was written, but it never got published.
You seem to be driven by this quest for justice in throughout your career and throughout your writing as well. How important is that? I mean, is it what drives you? Is it one of the things that drives you? It
is one of the things that drives me, yeah. I mean, I would say that the one thing that makes me most angry is injustice and unfairness in general and around us. And, there's plenty to go at.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you... I'm going to ask you just about something else now. I'm going to ask you about your career as a pop star. How did that come about?
Well, as is so often the way with these things, it was about drink. But not in this instance, me drinking. Yeah. Mark Billingham and Stuart Neville and Doug Johnson were at an American crime fiction convention in New Orleans. To an event at the House of Games, the House of Blues.
House of Blues.
House of Blues, the famous House of Blues.
Thinking of Richard Osman again. You've got to stop thinking about Richard Osman.
I can't help it. He's just so lovely. But they went to the House of Blues, and the house band was really rubbish. And then it was open mic, and people were complaining about how awful the house band were. And somebody said, "Well, the Brits are here. See if they can do any better." And the three of them sort of got their heads together, worked out 3 numbers they could do off the top of their head, and went up and did them. And somebody put this on YouTube, and the guy who did some of the programming at the Edinburgh Book Festival rang up Mark and said, "I hear you've got a band. I'm going to book you for the Unbound section at the Book Festival." And so Mark's going, "We've got 3 songs and 3 guys." So they had a quick scrabble around, and both Mark and Doug had done stuff with me singing. So Mark rang up and said, "You can sing." And yeah, I can sing. And Doug could drum, and Luca Vesti, we knew, had been in bands over the years.
He's a phenomenal guitarist.
Yeah.
If you ever hear him sing Britney Spears' "Hit Me Baby One More Time,"
there'll
be tears in your eyes.
You have to come and see the band.
Yeah?
We're now doing full Britney.
Ah, there you are.
Full Britney with the big guitars, and I play bass. Because Luca's busy singing, and he can't, bless him, sing and play bass at the same time. And so, we got Luca up to play bass, and then that was the core of the band, and we got together to have a rehearsal in Liverpool, and we sorted out some songs that we could sing. We decided right from the start we're going to do cover versions of songs about crime and murder, because bands mostly break up over musical differences, which is like, "I've written this great song," and everybody else goes, "No, it's shite."
It's a bit like my novels.
So we decided we were going to do cover versions. And we thought it might be quite an idea to have other people to come up occasionally and do guest numbers with us. So we got Chris Brookmeyer to come along, and he was going to do one number with us. He was going to do Werewolves of London. And he came along to rehearsal, and he was good, did a good job. But
you're in.
We didn't say you're in. We'll say we'll let you do Werewolves of London. But Chris is sneaky. So he turned up at the next rehearsal having learned the harmonies on all the songs that we do, and he started to teach himself guitar.
Oh, we didn't know
He
before.
didn't play guitar before, and now he plays lead guitar on some numbers. He's absolutely committed. 'Cause when Chris does something, he does it wholeheartedly. Just ask his wife how many hours a day he spends practicing his guitar. So now he's guitarist in the band, singer in the band.
He wedged his way in
He
there.
basically hammered the wedge in, So we ended up with a 6-piece band, the Fun-Loving Crime Writers, and we mostly end up playing book festivals because festival organisers like it because they get a twofer. They get a book event and they get the band.
And you're very good, but it's not just book festivals.
No, we have done Glastonbury, did Cornbury as well.
Did you ever think that you would play Glastonbury?
No. I did not think for a moment I was going to spend my 60s in a band with 65 guys.
Well, let's look at that. I think that's an interesting point to take stock. We've talked about books of the past. You've looked at different things in the past. When you look back, what are the things you're happiest with? What are you proudest of? I know you've got a long way to go. We're going to talk about that. But looking back at this milestone, 20 million books, you know?
Well,
What do you look back on and you think, that was brilliant, I never thought I'd get the chance to do that, or I'm proud of this?
well, a long time ago, somebody asked me, I think somebody was doing one of those features that magazines do from time to time, say, to sum up your life in 6 words, you know. And my 6 was, they said I couldn't do it. That's kind of been my motto. And I think the thing I used to be really proud of was being made an honorary fellow of my old college at Oxford at St Hilda's. You know, I was the first person they'd ever taken from a Scottish state school. And sort of again, I sort of elbowed my way in. You know, they said to me, "We've never taken anyone from a Scottish state school before." I said, "Well, it's about time you started."
Need them in the balls,
No.
figuratively.
They didn't have balls. It was a ladies'
Oh, it
college.
was a ladies' college, sorry.
I've only had May balls, you know. But, so when they made me an honorary fellow, I thought that was probably the top job. But then this week, I was just given an honorary doctorate by the whole university.
There you are.
You know, sort of. And that's an honour worth having, because that's chosen by your peers.
And not by Boris Johnson.
Indeed, well, yes. So that was really something special this week. It involved 3 days of pomp and circumstance, and there's this thing we have to do called Lord Cruise benefaction. So you go out, it's like a morning thing, and you get champagne and peaches and strawberries.
Did you say, that's not peaches and strawberries, I don't see any batter? So what does the future hold? What's coming up next?
Mere books.
More books?
More books.
Tell us a wee bit about these books.
There's a new Karen Pirie out in the autumn called Past Lying.
Okay.
And there'll be a new Karen Pirie series next year.
Right, a new series.
Yes. So that'll be fun. Lauren and I will get her bum bag on again, and we'll see another one of those. And they're doing a Darker Domain, which is partly set in Tuscany. So obviously I'm going to have to make a lot of set visits.
Yes, research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it'll be
Do you
19...
need someone to carry your bags?
No.
Oh.
I've got someone for that.
Dear.
And next year it'll be 1999. So I'm researching that at the moment and talking to people and getting a sense of what the through line is going to be. I know kind of what the things are that happened in 1999, but there's got to be I've got to find the murder in it, you know, and the story for that.
We leave the end of this book with Ali. Well, not at the end, but she does question, as you did, you know, how she can keep dealing with these emotional traumas, and I, for one, am sort of quite interested to see where she goes next. Hopefully there'll be some surprise. I'm sure there will be surprises.
I think there'll be quite a lot of surprises. I mean, it's going to be quite a hard road for both of them in the next book, but they'll get there.
So I'm going to open the floor. Questions to the floor. Who would like to ask Val the first question?
They've all gone shy now.
They've all
you see.
gone shy.
So if the thing is, if you don't put your hands up, we'll start picking on you and
we
asking
will.
you questions, you know.
There we are.
Who won the FA Cup in 1963?
Sorry, thank you. So I'm hoping to write my first book. I don't know where to start. So what would be your advice to aspiring writers?
Good question. What would be your advice?
Well, it depends what bit you're not quite sure about yet. About how you start. I mean, do you know what your story is?
Yes, so my
Oh, just a
Don't
sec.
tell
There's
us,
a mic's back.
Don't tell us, because somebody will steal it.
We'll steal it.
So my granddad's, he spent quite a bit of time in jail for various things. So I would like to write something about his stories, basically.
That's fine. As long, if you know where the story is, that's the first issue, really. Because I always think to clarify story, a good thing is to tell it like you would tell it to your pals in the pub. But in terms of discipline and doing it, yep, you should be hoping to write it. You should be planning to write it. And I always think that one of the things to do is to find some time in your life to ring fence. A bit of time, could be a bit of time every day, could be a bit of time every week. I wrote my first 4 books on Monday afternoons, because Sunday was my day off, and Monday was my day off, and my friends were all at their work on a Monday, and I could work on Monday afternoon without interruptions. And every Monday afternoon, 2 o'clock till 7 o'clock was my writing time. Didn't answer the phone, didn't answer the door. It was the day years before internet and all that sort of nonsense to distract you. And all week I'd be planning what I was going to do in that chunk of time. And I'd be thinking about what I'd done the week before that needed to be rewritten and revised. And actually, it turned into a very productive process. So I say, find a time that works for you. I know some people that get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do 2 hours before the kids get up. I mean, that would kill me. I couldn't do that. But I think if you take that time and ring fence it and tell everybody in your life, this is my writing time, do not speak to me, that's a good place to start. It's amazing how the pages pile up.
And switch off your phone. Seriously, the amount of time you lose on Twitter as a writer. Are you still on Twitter?
I am, but I don't do very much.
I'm trying to get
days.
off it, but it just drags me back in.
I had to go on Insta because my son went off to Spain and did the Camino, the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, and insisted on sending it out every day on Instagram. Yeah. So I had to join Insta.
You joined TikTok yet?
No, I'm no dancing.
Well, I was thinking, just the thought of TikTok puts my back out. Yeah. Does that help? No TikTok. Although no, you could get away with TikTok because you're still young, millennials.
No dancing. No dancing.
Let's have another question.
Hi.
There we are.
Got a quick question for Val. How did you feel about Karen Piries' appearance on the television?
Well,
being different to yours.
It's always going to be different. It's always going to be different. It doesn't matter how much say you have in casting or anything like that. They're always going to be different from what's in your head. When you read the book, you see a different Karen Pirie to the one that's in my head. We all see a different character in our heads because we put onto it all the things that have made us the people we are. We reflect our own lives, our own experience with how we envisage the characters in the books. I thought that Lauren Lyle did not look anything like the Karen Pirie in my head, but I thought that she completely embodied Karen. I mean, she felt to me like the essence of Karen. I thought she did a great job. I'm very glad for her to continue. And I mean, it was when I did Wire in the Blood, the only person that looked remotely like they did in my head was actually Robson Green as Tony Hill, who looked very like the Tony Hill in my head. But everybody else, not. So you just have to live with that. I mean, the whole when you agree to adaptation, you know right from the start that what's going to end up on the screen is going to be different from what you wrote, because the way of telling stories is different. I always cleave to what Elmore Leonard said, and somebody said to him, how do you feel about what Hollywood's done to your books? And he said, Hollywood hasn't done anything to my books. They're still there on the shelf exactly the way I wrote them. And that's the thing about books are interactive. When you read one of my books or one of Abir's books, anybody's books, you see it through your eyes, through the lens of your own experience of the world. And so that's different from everybody else's. And that's why books are so marvellous, because they've got that interactivity. It's not like films and television kind of spoon feeds us with what we're supposed to think and feel.
Still surprised by your Robson Green fetish here, though.
Not fetish, it's just like, he looks like the Tony Hill in my head.
I know.
You know? Well, he did back then.
Well,
not so much now.
Yeah. Tony's fine. He's still young.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering, do you ever scare yourself with your ability to be able to come up with such gruesome murders?
Oh, good question.
Well, I don't scare myself because I'm in control. No, when I finish my work at the end of the day, nobody gets dead before morning, you know. And I mean, I when I'm writing a scene that involves violence, for example, I think very carefully that I stay on the right line of telling the reader what they need to know, what they need to see, what they need to experience to get their own imagination working. And so, as I say, I try to judge the line where that is and stay on the right side of that line. But other people's books scare me because I'm not in control. I don't know what's going to happen next. So sometimes, you know, other people give me nightmares, but my own books don't because I'm the boss.
I have, my wife generally is the first reader for me, and she'll sometimes look at me and goes, how did you come up with that? She's worried about the person she married because she won't go on a cruise with me because I think I told her that the best place to kill someone is on the ocean. Yeah. So it saved me a bit of money, but yeah, it's a funny one.
Another good place is Southern California on a Saturday night because the cops are so busy that anything they can write off as accident, they will.
Oh, maybe, yeah. So I can tell her that and then we won't need to do LA.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's a good one, I like that one.
Yeah.
You lived in various places, Northumberland, Manchester Way, Edinburgh, Oxford, obviously, for a period. Do you have a favourite place? I know you're looking at doing a bit of work now in Tuscany, did you say? But for instance, I mean, one of my favourite series revolves around Bradfield. Peculiar, really, that we're now in Bradford.
Yeah.
Where did Bradfield come from?
Bradfield happened because I was writing The Mermaid Singing when I was living in Manchester, and James Anderton was the chief constable. And I knew when I started writing the book that it was going to be critical of the police. And I didn't want to find myself in a situation where I got arrested every time I drove my car out the drive. And, you know, that's not necessarily paranoia where Anderton was concerned. And so I thought, I have to put this in a fictitious city where I'm not going to get any blowback from it. I think in some ways, if I'd known it was going to be a series, when I wrote Mermaid Singing, I thought it was a standalone. If I'd known it was going to be a series, I might have put it in a real place. Because writing about a fictitious place sometimes feels like you're kind of balancing on lily pads, you know. But it has its uses as well, because whenever you want something, you can just put it where you want it to be. So I need a Premier League football team. I'll just drop one in here, you know. But yeah, that's kind of where it came from. But I do like writing against real backgrounds, and I think probably my favourite place is back in Fife where I grew up. But along the coast from there in the East Neuk of Fife, the fishing villages of the East Neuk is where I feel most at home. Looking out at the sea.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
My partner goes out kayaking, you know, and plays with the seals, but I just stay at home and look at the sea. And the dolphins.
Dolphins?
Dolphins. Sometimes we get the whale.
Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, you're in charge of your books, so is there a writer out there whose books you're reading and you think, oh my God, what are they smoking? Or is it something that scares you about their writing and you can't put the book down, you've got to turn that page?
There are a few writers like that, yeah. I think one of the things, though, and I don't know if you find this, is as a writer, you become a much more critical reader.
Yeah, I find it very difficult to read for pleasure these days, because you're analysing.
Yeah, you're going like, I'm never going to do that.
Yeah. Or, oh wow, this is done so well. You're looking at the construction.
I'm going to steal that, yeah.
I do a lot of that.
So it's a lot harder in a way to have that complete immersion.
Yeah.
It happens, it'll happen maybe half a dozen times in a year that you'll just get completely sucked into something. And it's not always crime fiction. And for me, there's one writer whose books always, as soon as they come through the door, that's it. Don't speak to me for the next 48 hours. Ali Smith, Scottish writer, novelist, extraordinary imagination. Yeah. And I just love her work. And she's somebody who, when I get to the end of the book, I want to go back to the beginning and read it again. But there are so many really terrific books out there. I've just finished reading Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, which I thought was wonderful. Just such an extraordinary book. It's a reworking, I suppose, of the ideas that are in David Copperfield, but she does it with such passion and such anger and such beautiful prose. So there's lots of really, really good stuff out there.
Do you read for prose now, or as opposed to plot, or is it a balance?
I've always read for prose. For 20 years now, I've done the New Blood panel at Harrogate, where I get to select 4 writers whose work I really enjoy with their debut novels.
I was honoured. You started my career being on your panel.
Well,
you've got a lot to answer for.
But one of the things I've always been looking for there is voice. The ability to write a good sentence, the ability to say something in a way that feels fresh to me. So often you start reading a book and it might have a great plot, it might have even interesting characters, but the prose is like square wheels. Yeah. And I can't read this. It's just unreadable. But we're not going to talk any more about celebrities.
Well, I was trying to not say anything at that point. I think we've got time for another question. Let's have one more question, because I think we're pretty much at. Let's
someone
have
at the back.
Oh.
If you can
shout very loudly from the balcony.
Get down to the front and shout.
Stand up and project.
Yes, like an actor.
I've been asked about the experience of translation, how that works in practice, how much consultation I get, and how do we deal with cultural issues. Yeah. The answer is it varies very much from language to language, and sometimes it is almost stereotypical. The Japanese, for example, always email me about police ranks. What is this rank in relation to this? And they want to know exactly where everybody is in the social hierarchy. The Swedes like a lot of cultural information. What is a TARDIS? And the Germans will generally pick me up on idiom that they don't recognise. The French leave out any jokes they don't get. And I've no idea about most of the other ones, because most of them don't bother to get in touch. They just go their own sweet way. So, I mean, there could be anything, really. You just have to trust. Sometimes, though, even with a really good translator, and in Germany I've been very well served by my translators, sometimes things just slip through. And in a book I wrote called A Place of Execution, which is set mostly in the 1960s, it's about the disappearance of a teenage girl, and the cop is searching her bedroom to see if there's any clues to what's happened to her there. And he opens a drawer and he finds a sanitary belt and some towels. In the German translation, the translator had made a mistake and translated the word for bath towels. So, obviously in Germany they have very heavy periods.
That's a serious one. Oh my word. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I really don't want to end here. It feels wrong. I am very upset that none of you asked her about 1979 and what happened. We'll save that for next time, shall we? What happened in that year that you just enjoyed so much? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a wonderful audience, and thank you to the one and only Val McDermid.
Good night.